In the days before Mega Charizard X and Alolan Executor, there was only one true dragon in the Kanto region. In fact, in all of Pokemon, the dragon type belonged to just one family: Dratini, Dragonair, and Dragonite, the OG. I mean, that was special, being the only dragon having a whole type to yourself. It was so incredible that at the time, the Dratini line was thought of as being a mythical Pokemon. I'm not talking about the fan terms we have now, I'm talking about in lore, in canon, before the term pseudo-legendary even existed. Dragonite was always thought of as special. And I have looked at over 30 years worth of Dragonite lore to put together in this video to celebrate the release of Mega Dragonite, who I think looks absolutely incredible. Art by Alex Allen. You're a wonderful artist. I have to say, I really like this design, and I think Dragonite deserves this, because as you'll see by the end of this video, after I've compiled together not only all the lore, but even all the theories to do with Dragonite, and there are quite a few out there, Dragonite deserves to be seen as something more than just an ordinary Pokemon, as something mythical. Oh, and I've actually been able to come up with an original Dragonite theory for this video. So let's take a look. So let me set the scene of Dragonite the way Generation 1 did. Dratini, Dragonair, and Dragonite were the only Dragon-type Pokemon, an incredibly powerful type that was only weak to Ice, which itself was quite rare and usually only came late in the game. You probably did not see this Pokemon through most of your journey, only really encountering Dragonite as the final boss of the game. Yes, of course, your rival becomes the champion, but you don't know that when you step into Lance's chamber and face off against the Dragon Master. But this type is so rare, he has to use other Pokemon, Aerodactyl, Charizard, Gyarados, that are not Dragon type, to tide him over until he can summon out the big guns that uses the incredibly powerful move Hyper Beam, in Generation 1, the most powerful move in the game. Oh, and also Lance's Dragonite would use the illegitimate move Barrier, which it shouldn't know in those games. It was able to learn it later on down the line, but not in those games. Also, in some versions of the game, Lance's Dragonite is under-leveled for where it should be for the evolution. There might be a theory about that coming a little later. They really knew they wanted Dragonite to be the final boss, and you can tell. Now, if you actually wanted to have one for yourself, well, you'd need to know where to look. The Safari Zone. You'd need to get lucky and have a Super Rod. You need to get lucky in just reeling one in, and then you need to get lucky in catching one. And even if you were so lucky as to catch the mythical Dratini, which, yes, its Pokemon Yellow and Stadium Pokédex entries mention that it is the stuff of myth and is only believed to be real now as the result of a fisherman catching one, a fisherman like yourself. Even if you caught one, it would be at such a low level that in order for you to have a Dragonite by the time you hit the Elite Four, it was very unlikely. So Dratini, Dragonair, and Dragonite. And let's look at those Pokédex entries. Dratini, thought of as the stuff of myth and legend. Dragonair has a special aura and can control the weather. It flies not just using the wings on its head, but also just seen sailing through the skies, which is incredible. And then there's Dragonite. It's called the Sea Guardian, has intelligence that matches that of people, can rescue stranded sailors if they're lucky enough to observe it, and can travel around the world at incredible speeds. Oh wow, and would you look at that, in Pokemon Violet, Dragonair got a brand new Pokédex entry that's never existed before. It is called the Divine Pokemon. So yeah, in Generation 1, it is fast, strong, intelligent, it has a unique type, it evolves from the mystical Dragonair and Dratini itself is adorable. It hits on all of the things that make Pokemon. Cute, rare, and strong. What's more is its position in the Pokédex. Before we had any sort of sequential Pokédexes, any more regional dexes that said that this was going to be a standard thing, and we came up with terms like the pseudo-legendary. Back then, it really was thought of as something special, being between Moltres, Zapdos, and Articuno, and Mewtwo in the Pokédex placements. They are quite literally telling you, this Pokemon is special. And you know what? It wasn't even just the games. In the animated series, the first appearance of Dragonite is not even as a regular Pokemon, but as the silhouette of a giant mystical being. Bill even describes the Pokemon as one of a kind, the last of its species. It gives the mind awe. It makes you wonder and consider, like, what else is out there in the world of Pokemon. In the same episode, Bill at his lighthouse mentions that there are over 150 species of Pokemon, and you really begin to wonder, yeah, maybe the world of Pokemon is bigger than I think, and it's all because of Dragonite. It also appears as the final boss for Ash to defeat before becoming a champion in the Orange Island arc. It will later show up again as Ash's ace to help him become the champion at the end of all of his arcs, so it still gets some modern love. It even shows up in the first movie, and this is where we first see a little bit of Dragonite's playful and adorable side, but even here, it is really only there to show how powerful Mewtwo is, that it could have a Dragonite as its postman. Or maybe Dragonite just is the perfect postman Pokemon because it can get around the world so fast. In fact, even in the TCG, Fossil Dragonite and Dark Dragonite are some of the most desirable cards of those original sets. Yeah, Dragonite was special in Generation 1. But it wasn't just Generation 1. In Generation 2, we got the introduction of Tyranitar, what we now know to be a sort of pseudo-legendary, but the term didn't really exist then. Tyranitar was just a different Pokemon. We did get a new Dragon-type Pokemon in Kingdra. Kingdra is used by Claire, Lance's cousin, and she is the 8th gym leader, the final challenge of Johto, before you then again face Lance as the champion who you will have witnessed using his Dragonite to Hyper Beam a Team Rocket person in the face. Yeah, pretty badass. If you did want a Dratini in Generation 2, well, you would have had a bit more luck, and I did fail to mention you could also get a Dratini in some Generation 1 games by getting very lucky on the slot machines in the game corner. It was a very expensive prize, but in Generation 2, you can also find it in the Dragon's Den, home to a clan of lore keepers, dragon masters that ultimately protect the sacred dragon Pokemon. That's how special they are. I mean, look, even in Generation 2, they thought of the Pokemon as so special, they put it on the Neo Destiny art, right next to the mysterious Celebi and Unknown, and I guess the less mysterious Octillery. But you get the point. People thought of Dragonite as special, and Dragonair and Dratini too. Generation 3, though. Suddenly we get a bunch of new dragon Pokemon, not just Salamence, Flygon, the Latias, and of course Rayquaza. Dragon Pokemon start as every generation goes on to become more common. Generation 4, we've got Garchomp and Dialga and Palkia. Generation 5, more legendary dragons in Reshiram and Zekrom. And Dragonite begins to lose its place. Don't get me wrong, it's still held in high regard by the people of the Pokemon world. In Generation 3, Dragonite is the final prize of Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness as the shadow Pokemon you get if you've caught every other shadow Pokemon. In Generation 4, Palmer, that's Barry's father, and the head of the battle tower, he uses one as his sort of main ace non-legendary Pokemon. And in Generation 5, the champion Iris, the Dragon Master, and even the Dragon Prodigy Benga both use Dragonite as important members of their team. And in fact, in beating Benga, you get a shiny Dratini gifted to you in-game in White 2 version. So it's still thought of as special. In fact, in Generation 5, Team Plasma even steal a Dragonite skull from the Nakari Museum. They do this to show how serious they are about their plans of liberating all Pokemon, because doing that, stealing the skull of a Dragonite, if nothing else, it is a symbol of power, it is a sign of strength to do such a thing. But by this time, Generation 6 is rolling around. The term pseudo-legendary has come into popular use. Mythicals, as a result of the Year of the Mythical, is now firmly an official canon term, and it just doesn't refer to Pokemon like Dratini. The Fairy type shows up, giving Dragon Pokemon a really hard time, and the Dragon pseudo-legendaries become more gimmicky and interesting. Goodra and Komodo and Dragapult and Baxcalibur, they are very interesting Dragon Pokemon, and Dragonite just feels a little bit vanilla as a Dragon flying type. What does it mean in lore to be the Dragon Pokemon when there are so many Dragon Pokemon? Even in the Kanto region, by the time of Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, there's a Alolan Executor and Mega Charizard X making their way onto Lance's team, such that it's unclear if Dragonite is even really his ace, or whether it's the Mega Evolution Mega Charizard X. This is a shame to me, because I remember being a kid, I remember getting to Lance for the first time in Pokemon Yellow, my first Pokemon game, and seeing this sprite. And in every replay and every revisit of a classic Pokemon Yellow that I've played in the years since, this sprite still fills me with awe. And there's definitely been always something hidden within the Dragonite line. As I mentioned earlier, Dragonair has a Pokédex entry talking about how it's filled with aura. Aura is a particular word in the world of Pokemon. Lucario channels it, and it very much ties into the life force of Pokemon and Mega Evolution. And now we see that burst forth with Mega Dragonite. And I couldn't be happier to see it. Because Dragonite is a Pokemon that should be thought of as more than just normal. Kind of like the Unknown. Which, by the way, I did a whole lore deep dive on the Unknown recently. Please go check that video out. It is one of my favorites I've ever done. This video is kind of a miniaturized version of that, but just for the Dragonite line. And I want to do more of this kind of thing. So please subscribe if you're enjoying what you're watching. But with all that said, that is the lore. So how about the legends? What theories? What things have people said in the community that kind of add up to make the story of Dragonite more interesting? The first one you've definitely heard of before, the middle ones maybe not so much, and the last one, well, it's new for this video. I've never seen a YouTube video on it. So sit back and relax as we jump into the lore of Dragonite. So, like I say, this first theory, you have probably heard of it before, and I'm going to try and do it with a straight face. Okay. Dratini evolves into Dragonair, but was intended to evolve into Gyarados, and Magikarp was intended to evolve into Dragonite. I can't even do it. Look, it's a common theory and a fun thing to do with those Generation 1 Pokemon. You're probably familiar with the Venonat, Butterfree, Caterpie into Venomoth situation. And look, there's no actual kind of confirmation out there. There's nothing in the designs of the world of Pokemon that will give you an answer. But just focusing in-world, it is interesting to at least think that there might be a relationship between these two species of Pokemon and why people might have thought that. Because it's not just the visual. If I'm going to steelman this and give it my best faith interpretation, well, Dragonite is talked about as the Sea Guardian. Isn't that a description that would work better for a Gyarados? And Gyarados' Pokedex entries talk about how it's a raging dragon. Doesn't that fit better for the Pokemon that literally uses Outrage, Dragonite? The visual similarities of Magikarp with the Wisp. Magikarp, of course, is based off of the story of a koi fish that jumps over a waterfall and becomes a dragon. And Gyarados is a dragon type not. Huh? I don't know why I said that backwards. Look, even Pokemon has been confused about this and referenced this. In fact, in the Journeys episode where Ash catches a Dragonair on the island of Dragonites, because apparently they live on some mystical island out at sea, which is a really just fun trait. I should have really put that in the lore section. Go and Ash are very confused about Dragonair's evolution line, thinking that it should evolve into something like a Milotic, which could very closely be linked to, you know, Gyarados. Gyarados is even described in-world in the Pokedex as a dragon. So you can see the confusion here, but personally it's a theory that I don't think flies. Which, despite the fact that Gyarados doesn't have wings and Dragonites couldn't possibly lift it off the ground until they're on its head, they both do. Anyway, let's fly along to the next theory. Lance cheated. Lance totally cheated, right? I mean, he's got the Dragonite that knows Barrier, and he's got the under-leveled Dragonites. How's that possible? Well, in later generations, Dragonite would get access to the move Barrier, so that already kind of retcons that bit away. But what about the under-leveled Dragonite? How does that work? Well, there's sort of two ideas here. One is that actually he got his Dragonite from the Alola region. See, in the Alola region, you can do this thing called SOS chaining to catch Dratini, but when you SOS chain, what you're doing is injuring the Pokemon to the point where it calls to a family member or friend for help. And if you do that enough times with Dratini and send out these lures, you can bait in a Dragonite that is as low as level 10 in the wild. So maybe he just got his Dragonite from Alola. But that means he probably didn't train up his Dragonite from a Dratini. He probably just kind of got one of these, I guess, low-level Dragonites, which sort of suggests that Lance is not the dragon expert he says he is. That kind of ties into the second part of this, which is, well, maybe he did cheat. I don't really know what that means, to cheat by having like a biological creature that is weaker than it should be. I don't really get what that means. But maybe he had some help. Maybe it's all for show. Lance in the anime is referred to as Fabulance.
It's Fabulance!
Fabulance! And it's true, he's a kind of showy guy. In fact, in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, he's wearing like this cape and he's kind of got this pop star look about him. That's a really interesting redesign of the character. In fact, a bunch of characters had redesigns in Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, and Lance's is, in my opinion, quite dramatic. He's like a modern day dragon lore keeper. He's kind of like Zinnia, but like modernified. He actually gets his cape, according to trivia, from the Celadon department store. So clearly it's not about the tradition, it's more about showing off. The Indigo Plateau stands between the Kanto and Johto region, and Lance is its champion primarily. And both of these regions are regions where dragon Pokemon are considerably rarer than anywhere else in the Pokemon world. I do wonder why, and actually I have a theory for that coming up next. But perhaps Lance is more like a showman, a symbol of power by the government of the Pokemon world to just kind of show off how great the two regions are, unified by this draconic power. The problem is there's so few dragons in Kanto, they have to pull from like Seadra and Charizard, and Aerodactyl, and Alolan Executor to still keep their kind of cultural identity. But hey, at least they have the rare Dragonite. But why are dragons so rare in Kanto and Johto? Well, There is a theory for this too, and then once I've done this theory, I've got the new one that I've made up for this video, which I'm so excited about it, but we'll get there. But first, why are dragons so rare in Kanto? Well, it could be because while dragons do exist everywhere across the Pokemon world, we are aware that in other regions, some types are just rarer than others. Maybe something happened in the environment, maybe some kind of ecological change. That's, of course, where I'm going with this. I think that dragons were eventually retconned to make sense for the Kanto and Johto region, and Kanto specifically. Because yes, they used to be incredibly rare, but perhaps they were more populous in the region. Perhaps Executor used to grow that tall. We see this version of Executor on the Jungle Booster Pack artwork. Perhaps Seadra used to evolve into Kingdra, and perhaps Aerodactyl in the ancient skies of Kanto were part dragon type. You find the fossil for Aerodactyl in the Pewter Museum. They probably got this fossil, this bit of amber, from Mount Moon, right next door. The mountain that is named for the meteorite that struck it, the giant Moonstone. This Moonstone, I believe, brought with it all the fairy type that are in the Kanto region. Okay, maybe not Mr. Mime, but Mr. Mime was already pretty rare anyway in Kanto. I'm talking about the more common ones, Jigglypuff and Clefairy. Jigglypuff and Clefairy are absolutely from outer space and related to outer space. Yes, they evolve via the Moonstone, but other Pokemon do that too. But here's the thing, you always find them in great craters. The giant chasm in Unova, Meteor Falls in Hoenn, the kind of mountaintops of Alola, wherever meteorites strike, these Pokemon show up. Why? Are they just interested in the Moonstone, or could they really be aliens from space? Well, in the time of Generation 1, certainly the anime thought so. But they're not just alien invaders, they're not just new predators entering an ecosystem, they're the only fairy-type Pokemon entering that ecosystem. Perhaps dragon Pokemon used to be more common around the Mount Moon area, hundreds or maybe thousands of years ago, but when that meteorite crashed and brought with it an influx of fairy Pokemon, they started making their way across Kanto, and with it, pushing back the dragon Pokemon that had not evolved any defenses to deal with them. Yeah, that is one scary Igglybuff. In the other regions of the Pokemon world, dragon Pokemon and fairy Pokemon co-evolved alongside each other, and so there's a nice amount of each. But here, in the Kanto region, they weren't ready for that. And so eventually, all of the dragon Pokemon, well, Aerodactyl, if it wasn't already at that point, became extinct. Seadra just didn't evolve anymore into Kingdra. It was less advantageous to do so. Execute can still be found in the Safari Zone, but they don't grow as tall, changing their type to Psychic and becoming stunted. And Dratini, it's only found very rarely in the Safari Zone, a conservation area, a conservation project. That actually could be part of what Lance's showmanship is about as well, is bringing eyes and attention to this conservation effort. So maybe it's that, and maybe that's why the Dragonite line is so rare in the time of Generation 1. Or maybe it was just because Dragonite was really thought of as such a special Pokemon, and they were still thinking about that around the time of Generation 2. Because I have one last, new, original theory. You have not heard this one anywhere on YouTube before, I promise you. What if Dragonite was sort of intended to be legendary, or part of the legendary story, much like the Unknown? Again, check this video out at the end. What if, for example, we go back to how a legendary Pokemon was first introduced in the anime, Ho-Oh, appearing over the skies when Ash Ketchum began his journey. He then also sees this Dragonite outside Bill's lighthouse, and Bill comments on the fact that, yeah, there are other species of Pokemon out there. There is stuff that we just don't know. In that episode, I remember that the Dragonite had this noise, this cry that it made. And if that sounds familiar to you, take a listen to this from the movie 2000. That's interesting. Lugia and Dragonite. Could there be some kind of connection here? Well, Lugia in the movie 2000 is the beast of the sea, and Dragonite described as the guardian of the sea. Dragonite appears in the Pokedex right after the legendary birds, just like Ho-Oh appears after the legendary beast. Both Lugia and Dragonite have the multi-scale ability, and in fact, there's a lot of people that have a problem with Dragonite shiny. Wouldn't it be fixed if Dragonite just evolved straight into Lugia? On top of that, Lugia is the master of the legendary birds, trying to quell them from fighting in the movie 2000 that they might stop the incredible, crazy weather that's going on across the Orange Islands. The Orange Islands, where Dragonite is not only the champion's main Pokemon in Ash's final fight, but also the weather controlling. Didn't we mention that that was a power of Dragonairs? Look, when I started coming up with this idea, I did do a quick Google. Has anyone kind of covered this before? Is there any more evidence? I did find a Reddit thread from about 7 years ago, but there wasn't a lot there. And then there's this kind of final part, the part I'm hinting to with my shirt. In Pokemon XD, Gale of Darkness, Shadow Lugia is the big project of Team Cypher. They intend to corrupt this Lugia so much that it turns into the pure Shadow Pokemon, and they successfully do so, naming it Project XD001. But how would they have done this research? Well, maybe by experimenting on one of Lugia's closest living relatives, a non-legendary version, of course, but powerful enough that they could catch it. And that's why Shadow Dragonite is the final boss of Gale of Darkness, and the last one you can obtain. I think at the minimum, Dragonite and Lugia are definitely biologically related, which is super interesting. I'm so glad to see Dragonite finally get a Mega Evolution, to get the love it deserves. It's time for us to find out what it means to be the Dragon Pokemon, capital T, capital D, in a world where other Dragon Pokemon exist. And I think it's time for us to look at the lore of Pokemon that we've overlooked, Pokemon that are not legendary, but kind of are, because the story is there, just like... By the way, there are over 300 of you supporting on Patreon and as YouTube members that make these videos happen. Thank you to everyone who's signing up and getting the perks. You're incredible. I can't wait to make more of these lore deep dives.